If you're struggling with your mental health as a father at any age, this episode is for you. My guest has studied and learned much about the mental health crisis surrounding dads and has written a book about it. He will share his own story and what he has learned and offer much needed hope in just a moment, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge, a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability and culture of their family's environment. Now, here's your host, Jonathan Guerrero.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest is Mark Williams. Mark is a keynote speaker, author, and international campaigner for mental health awareness for fathers. Mark, thank you so much for joining me on the Fatherhood Challenge.
No, thank you, Jonathan. Honestly, I'm looking forward to it. Actually, and thank you for letting me share the message as well. Definitely, thank you.
Absolutely. So I've got to ask, what is your favorite joke, Mark?
Ooh, okay. Doctor. I feel like a pair of curtains. You better pull yourself together. Bad. It's bad, isn't it? Sorry. But I tried.
Mark, what is your own personal story behind why you became so involved with mental health for fathers?
Yeah, it started in 2004. So we planned to become parents. We just got married at a house. And me and Michelle were in totally different jobs where we are now. But yeah, we thought we were ready, and I was 30 years of age then, you know. So the pregnancy was fine, nothing wrong with the pregnancy. But after 22 hours labour, Michelle was in. My anxiety was starting to get worse and worse. And then the doctors came rushing in and they said, Mr. Williams, you know, your wife needs emergency C-section. We need to get it down to the theatre quick. And Jonathan, it's the first time and only time I've actually had a panic attack. And, you know, I felt so guilty now the attention's on me when it should be on my wife, Michelle, you know. And it wasn't when I went to theatre then, obviously, and what I witnessed, obviously, of course, you know, I honestly thought my wife and baby was going to die in that situation. And I felt helplessness. I didn't know what to do. You know, I was under the impression, you know, in the labour, cut the baby's cord and off you go, happy families. And it wasn't the case for Michelle. And obviously, as we know now, PTSD is an anxiety disorder, either witnessing or experiencing a life-threatening event, you know. So, yeah, it's nothing worse than thinking your wife and baby's going to die in that situation for me and a lot of parents and partners and grandparents as well.
So what you basically experienced was a birth trauma.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you know, 19 years ago, it wasn't really much awareness. And, you know, perinatal mental health obviously has grown over the last 10 to 12 years, especially in the UK, as I say. So, but back then, you know, we weren't even talking about mental health, you know, depression or anxiety or PTSD. You know, it's of course, it was associated with people with in the armed forces, but, you know, people were aware that, of course, fathers can experience PTSD as well, and certainly my wife did. And but it wasn't until a couple of days after my wife was really unwell on the ward, things changed rapidly, and you know, I was expecting to leave that birth experience, you know, the three of us, but obviously it was only myself, and I couldn't process what just went on. And the first thing I did was drink, you know. I knocked my next door neighbours at the time to use alcohol, you know, to cope with it, because it was just too much going on, you know, I was thinking. And but things really escalated after Michelle got discharged, and she was quickly, after a couple of weeks, in crisis team, where my wife is very open about this, and she tried to take her life by suicide, you know. And this is a woman I love, obviously, and still love today, but she never experienced any, you know, anxiety or depression, as I should say, you know, severe as she was getting, you know, after the birth. And so for the first couple of weeks before the crisis team came in, you know, I was trying to hide it from people, and, you know, trying, because I was worried about social services. I was worried that the baby was going to be taken off us. I was worried about all sorts of things as a father. And I was expected to be back in work in 2 weeks, and I was self-employed. So luckily I had a good manager who said, look, you know, take as much time off you want. Obviously you won't get paid. I was eventually off for 6 months, you know, because after Michelle went into crisis, it was a case that it was a world I never experienced before, you know, and there certainly wasn't any special services in the UK for mums back then. So my wife was on a hospital ward with, people with all different disorders, as well. So I was totally uneducated about mental health, totally uneducated myself. So I didn't know about severe postnatal depression, but it was later diagnosed afterwards as she had PTSD as well.
There really wasn't much awareness for how to treat your wife's mental awareness or mental illness as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's when I was CPA nurse, a community mental health nurse who was caring for Michelle. Gail James, she actually went into the field of specialising in perinatal mental health. And she came across a lot of mums like Michelle, and she went on to set up a group, afterwards. But certainly back then, postnatal depression in fathers, which I talk a lot about as well, and it was really a case of like, for mums back then, what have we got to be depressed about? You just had a baby. Those sort of conversations were going on as well in 2004. So we have come a long way as well. But certainly back then, no, and certainly when it comes to fathers, it was literally nothing. I wasn't even asked about my mental health back then either. Like a lot of fathers today are not asked either.
The part I can really relate to is the part where you felt guilty for what you were feeling and you did not want to call any attention to yourself and take the attention off of your wife, who was needing care at that moment as well. Very much so. I can relate to that feeling very much. I also experienced birth trauma. It wasn't till many, many years later that I realized that that's what I was going through. But looking back now, I felt exactly what you were feeling. I felt that guilt for what I was feeling, and I tried to just suck it up and deal with it in the moment and not call any attention to myself. Yeah, and I know many other dads can have experienced that as well and can relate to that.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for sharing your story as well, because it's a big issue that especially in the UK and what I've come across, a lot of fathers don't get the root of the cause and end up in services, and who may not, another baby comes along and there's more antenatal anxiety then, because obviously the father's thinking, is it going to happen again? Those sorts of things. And communication is a big factor, where, sometimes mum is overthinking, is there anything I've done? But the way dad's presenting, like I did, avoiding situations, I was drinking more, feeling feelings of anger, all these thoughts and feelings, I couldn't tell my wife how I was feeling because I didn't want to impact on her mental health even more. So I suppressed those feelings for many years as well, so it's very common, more common than we think it is.
What are the statistics behind fathers who struggle with mental health or fathers who commit suicide?
There's a couple of new studies come out in Canada, a recent study, and it's anything from like 22% onwards, it's saying. But when you look at the overall studies, it's 1 in 10, we've known for years. And but that was over like 40, many studies, but overall it was 1 in 10. So, even though 1 in 10 is a lot, but we got to remember it was 1 in 10 for years for mums. And then when there was more evidence and research and more screening and assessment, knowledge behind it, we know now it's far higher than 1 in 10 in mums. So eventually this will be known as it is far higher than 1 in 10, definitely. But the one thing is with suicide. So in the UK, it's we call it die by suicide because it ain't actually a crime to die by suicide. And so it's up to 47 times more risk a father is to obviously of suicide as a new father, up to 47. And that research came out in 2010. So, this, and it was a pretty big study as well on the father. So, so we got, in the UK especially, well, we know, the biggest killer in men under 45 being suicide. And we know the high risk of suicide in women, which is high risk in maternal mental health. And we still not screen assessing dads, So, we know a lot of these men will die by suicide after the postnatal period as well. And also we know that some of the risk factors could have been from what happened as becoming a new father as well. So it does get more complex. I was actually diagnosed with ADHD at 40 and 10 years ago. So there could be other issues, for instance, neurodiversity. You've got bipolar schizophrenia dad, who struggled with problems with his mental health before becoming a dad. And then you put the lack of sleep on top of that as well. Then you got different structures and different things we know with the transition of parenthood as well. So working more hours because there's loads of reasons why sometimes it can get worse when becoming a new dad as well.
So, in other words, we could really almost spend an entire new episode just on the topic of the complexities of mental illness that can contribute into the birth experience, or even the other way around. I never thought of sleep being a factor, but yes, that's an obvious one. Both the mother and the dad are not getting very much sleep in the very beginning during the birth experience, and definitely after the birth experience. And that plays a very, very big part. And then you added several more factors into it that many of us don't think of. If we have other things going on, if we have ADHD, and there may be a host of other things that may have been there before the birth, and all of that factors in. And that really leads me into the next question that it makes me wonder. I mean, is mental health of fathers ignored or treated with less seriousness or awareness than that of mothers? And if that is the case, why do we think that is?
Yeah, so I know a bit about, obviously, in the States, about I work with a gentleman called Dr. Daniel Singley. He does a lot on fathers, and but also what I know now, especially in the UK, it is we are understanding it better, but it's only when mums are unwell and the fathers in England can get screened for their mental health. So, which is a good start, but a lot of mothers tell me that, Mark, I'm fine. My partner husband is actually struggling, and it's actually impacting on my mental health. And so some of the research is saying that up to 50% of fathers can actually get depression looking after their mothers with postpartum depression as well. So, if dad's got a depression, obviously it's up to 50% of mums can get affected. So the whole idea is really get a more holistic approach, support both parents and at the same time if they're struggling, and then the outcomes are far better for themselves and relationships, and obviously the child development as well, because like I said, fathers, when they are depressed, they're less likely to sing, read, dance and play. They're less likely to follow good health guidelines like keeping the baby safe as well. So there's other issues that comes into it, why we should be looking at a father's mental health, because obviously the impact they may have on the family members as well.
That's interesting. I think that may be the first time I've ever heard that approach of treating the mental health of both the mother and the father at the same time. So it's probably safe to assume if one or the other is experiencing depression during or after the birth experience, it's probably safe to assume the other one is, and we're further ahead just to go ahead and screen and treat them both. I think that is probably one of the wisest approaches I've ever heard.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. And like you said, I've been campaigning with government level, and the most important, of course, is the parents, but the economic costs, when, that we found, it can save billions, because a lot of these men are going into other services and relationships break down, and then there's other issues within the relationship when they can't see the children, all sorts of things interlinks with a lot of other things as well, So yeah, it's that early prevention, and it's such an important time. I always say mental health, early prevention starts from pregnancy, So we should be looking after mum and dad or whoever that parent is, and, support them, because then they can look after the baby better then as well.
I want to throw this question in there because I know this has been on the minds of many dads. It was definitely on my mind at the time I was going through this. If you are experiencing, like even right now, if you're the dad listening now and you are experiencing depression, it doesn't matter if it's been recently after the birth or it's been sometime after the birth or maybe even during the birth process. But right now you are experiencing some kind of depression. You're just feeling down, you're feeling the blues, and there's all kinds of ways that happens. You feel maybe like sleeping more, or maybe you're having trouble sleeping. You have all kinds of intrusive thoughts that go through your mind, all kinds of things. If that is you right now, And Mark, I'm asking you, if that dad that's going through this now, should he tell his partner, or should he tell his wife, or is it better to keep it to himself?
Well, we did some work with parents during COVID, and so I worked with midwife, and the mums, funny enough, would rather know what's going on than them second guessing. And so that came up a lot when we did the exercise. No, I'd rather know, because I'm thinking about everything. I'm thinking he's having an affair because he's not there. I'm thinking, does he love me anymore? Sometimes when it comes to sex, sometimes the fathers want to have sex with their partners because they wanted, their partners to be pregnant again, and then go for that trauma again, sort of thing. So these topics do come up. And what I know from my own personal experience only is that when I did have no choice to tell Michelle when I was in crisis afterwards, that's something we do constantly all the time now. We're checking each other, and I'm more open with my wife, Michelle, now than ever over the last 15 years because, I got nothing. It's nothing to be ashamed of, really. We talk about physical health more than ever. So, if you are struggling, it could be the smallest thing sometimes. It could be the biggest thing to you. And that, with the help of your partner, could actually solve that situation together. So yeah, I'm always down. I'm very person-centered when I say this, but what's worked for me is having a better conversation and openness with my partner, wife Michelle.
Okay, so that's completely flipping the narrative or flipping the thought process of most dads. And I think what you said is so powerful and important. So what you're saying is probably maybe one of the first steps of your treatment. If this is what you're going through, maybe one of the very first steps that you should do is open up to your partner, to your wife, to go tell them, be honest with them about how you're feeling. I can tell you firsthand, I mean, the times I've opened up with my wife, I mean, what it actually does is it does build the connection, it does build closeness, it does increase that bond. And maybe you're both in the dumps together, but being in that dark place together is so much better than being in that place alone. It's so powerful to hear you say that, Mark, from your perspective and from your side of it. Your wife preferred, and most wives would prefer, that their husbands would open up about what's going on in their minds and in their own mental health.
Absolutely, Jonathan. Yeah, definitely. It's the best thing I did, actually. And, and even now, if I want time out, she knows, okay, she's more aware, So, yeah, absolutely. It's something that from the fathers, obviously, I've spoken to over the years, that's one of the biggest things they just don't want to tell their partners. They don't, like you mentioned, intrusive thoughts, dads I've spoken about intrusive thoughts are going to harm a baby and all sorts of things. Well, we know it's obviously that happens to mums, so, maternal or paternal OCD, it is another common area. But the good thing about this show as well is very much is raising awareness to educate the mothers so they can look out for the signs and symptoms if their partner's actually going through trauma as well, So it's really important that mums are aware because, they see them every day as well.
The one common thread I see out of this is when it comes to the perinatal mental health experience, it is becoming less of a gender issue. Well, maybe we have made it a gender issue, but in fact, it's becoming less of an issue between genders, and it's becoming a simple, basic human need.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. It's it is. It's when you think of it, in my experience, obviously, it's if the understanding of it, that and the other things that other fathers I speak to, when they know that there's other fathers are actually they feel better knowing, gosh, I'm not the only one now, and this is why it's great that you're doing the work you're doing, because. Like I said, I'm all about equality. I'm all about every single person should have the same support, and that has far better outcomes as a parent. And it doesn't matter. Like I said, if nobody was shouting for mums years ago, and everyone shouted for dads, I'd probably be known more for maternal mental health because it's pretty clear, it's pretty obvious that if you support all parents, the outcomes are far better, far better as well.
Now, you've written a book. Tell me a little bit about your book and the journey behind what led you to write that book.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate. I've done a couple of books over the years. It was one turned into a film on Amazon Prime, Daddy Blues. But it was, and we self-funded it. People think you make a lot of money in books. Trust me, unless you're J.K. Rowling or somebody like that. But the idea of the book is really just to raise awareness and understanding. And so the doctor I work with, we did a book a couple of years ago. It was very academic, and it was great book but I wanted to write the book with evidence and research, and so that anyone interested in mental health, social workers, doctors, could be, parents may have an interest in mental health, so it's really for people like really to show the evidence in it, and give the voices of parents in it as well as the academics as well. It's very important I put that in there as well. So it's just it's coming out now soon. It's How Are You, Dad? And if anyone's interested as well, is I did a TEDx talk called The Importance of Mental Health, which is obviously the strapline of the book, really. So, they can have a look at that to share with their colleagues or whatever, because they might have a father or a friend who's struggling. And it's just normalizing that conversation that all the thoughts and feelings I was getting as a new father, there were so many out there having it, but I didn't know any other fathers going through the same sort of journey as me at the time.
If you happen to know a dad who is struggling with his mental health, whether it's a new dad or a dad that's struggling with paternal postpartum depression or an older dad, doesn't matter. What are the most important things that you can do to help?
Certainly, as mentioned, obviously, going to see your health professional, obviously. But one thing's, just having a conversation, looking out for different signs for behaviors that could be, like I mentioned earlier on, is he avoiding situation, drinking more? Is his personality changed during the pregnancy and afterwards? These could be signs as well, as mentioned. But also, like I said, it's really I found when I started educating myself on it as well. I found, gosh, that helped me a lot as well, understanding why I was behaving in these different ways as well. But yeah, I think if there's any colleagues out there, just ask the question, how are you, Dad? How are you getting on? Because like you mentioned about sleep, severe sleep deprivation, that can cause psychosis on its own, so these sort of things, maybe some fathers who just want a conversation, just see how things going on, and I don't see him again then. They just want to have a chat. And to the most severe end, where unfortunately I've supported fathers where, they have made plans to die by suicide, and obviously we've put interventions in place then. But sometimes majority of fathers I speak to just want somebody to talk to, just somebody saying this is how he's feeling. Because certainly when I was becoming, I didn't get this overwhelming feeling love for my son initially, because I was just so concerned. He was, there was so much going on, but that bond and attachment grew when I was home for that 6 months, doing skin to skin, baby massage, all that stuff, which I self-taught myself. So these sort of things can help dads as well, skin to skin, releases oxytocin, good for dad and baby, being involved, into breastfeeding where, fathers may feel excluded sometimes during this period and feel isolation, loneliness. So it's trying to empower the dads and explain to mums that it's very important that we include dads in this process as well.
The title of your book makes it so simple. How are you, Dad? The simple question, very, very simple question, can have such a powerful impact. Just checking in with that dad. That's what I love, that the advice that you gave. It's so simple, and it is probably the one thing that a lot of new dads and even older dads are hungry for the most. That community, that fellowship. In addition to reading your book, what are some other resources that you would recommend to dads who just need a little bit of extra hope?
I would certainly look at more the, like for instance, the early years stuff. If you are becoming a new dad, prepare yourself. The language and the labor ward can cause trauma as well. For me, emergency C-section. So the language, empower, learning, asking a midwife. If you've got any questions, empower yourself to go on to it. It doesn't matter how silly the question is. Make sure, you get your point across so you can understand it better as well. So, yeah, it's engaging with health profession. But remember, dads out there, you've got your own experience. And remember that it's okay to have those feelings. and to empower yourself. It might be you're more concerned about your partner's mental health. Empower yourself to say, okay, I want to know more, for instance. So that's something I can think of off the top of my head.
How can dads find your book, connect with you, or learn more about what you're doing?
I got a website. It's called www.howayouDad.co.uk. And there's some articles, obviously, I've done, online. So if you look at Mark Williams, Father's Mental Health, and we also got an International Day, which is always a day after Father's Day in the UK, and it's International Father's Mental Health Day. So if anyone wants to be involved with that, anyone really can certainly come on board, and we on that day we do certainly give out a lot of information and resources, and obviously normalize those conversations. We should be talking about it every day, but it's one day of the year that we really push ourselves out there to get as much information out there for people.
And just to make things easier, if you go to thefatherhoodchallenge.com, that's thefatherhoodchallenge.com. If you go to this episode, look right below the episode description, and I'm going to have all of the links posted there for your convenience. So you can just click on them and it'll take you right to those resources. And Mark, as we close, what is your challenge to that dad listening now who's struggling and he's just bottling everything inside?
Yeah, well, I'll take myself to that moment. The quicker the help, the quicker recovery. And there's no shame. And if luckily for me, I had a total breakdown because I was so unwell. I was getting all thoughts, obviously suicide. I never made a plan, but I was very unwell. And so the quicker the help, the quicker recovery, I always say. At the end of the day, it's that early prevention, because I know from my own experience and speaking to other parents, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and that's not good for you, your family, and obviously your children as well. So yeah, no shame. Just make sure you speak out today to somebody. It
has been an honor and a pleasure having you on the Fatherhood Challenge. You've given us so much to think about. You've challenged our thinking, and I know you've helped a lot of dads out there that just need that extra little bit of encouragement and help, and you've provided resources to be able to help these dads heal. Thank you so much for being on the Fatherhood Challenge.
No, thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for asking me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatherhood Challenge. If you would like to contact us, listen to other episodes, find any resource mentioned in this program, or find out more information about the Fatherhood Challenge, please visit thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com.
I'd like to pause and thank our proud sponsor of the Fatherhood Challenge, Zencastr. If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcast production platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. But the reason I personally use and trust them with the production of this syndicated radio program is their professional broadcast quality sound. There is no better time than now to start your podcast using Zencastr for all your needs. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code FATHERHOOD, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.